right, we're going to kick off our presentation with a land acknowledgement here. So in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, Alchemy Communications, as an inhabitant of Calgary, Alberta, honors and acknowledges Mohkinstsis and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina nations. We also acknowledge that the territory we work and live upon is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3 within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. A little bit about who we are. So Alchemy Communications is a full service marketing, public relations, and crisis communications agency.
Drew, we're just getting some background noise. I wonder if we can ask.
Yeah, I just muted.
Mute?
Yeah, I just muted. All good. Yeah, just a reminder, if you're not speaking, just hit the little unmute or the mute button. It just makes it easier for everyone, but that's okay. Awesome. So yeah, so we're a full service agency. As Catherine mentioned, we work a lot with municipalities, nonprofits, and also small to mid-sized businesses. We do everything from communications, internal communications, external marketing strategies, public relations, and crisis comms. So we'll be touching on a lot of those areas during today's presentation. And then also at the end of the presentation, we have a slide on some upcoming workshops that dive deeper into some of the topics that we will be talking about today, because we could probably spend the whole day talking about this in depth. So perfect. Okay, so why municipalities need effective marketing and communication strategies? I assume the reason you're here is because you all identify that and a need to learn more and just find out why this is an area that for you'd like to build upon. So of all the public sector organizations that could benefit from marketing, municipalities have been identified as having the most to gain by adopting practices that have been traditionally used for kind of corporate environments, or where the goals are to raise money or build programs, stuff like that. So it's not that very different if you just change a few words around. So in that, municipalities delivering programs and services that affect the lives of citizens every day. So whether it be helping a new business get started, or delivering recreation programs, ensuring effective transit, beautifying cities, building up tourism, basically any organization, you have those tools that marketing can be utilized to improve upon. So if you're concerned with attracting new customers, in this case might be tourism, or even just speaking to residents, there's a lot to gain by adopting and adapting marketing strategies. Sorry, a few people are coming in the room here. I'm just letting them in. So that being said, there's a lot of priorities. Obviously, you're dealing with other things, and marketing could be one of those ones that kind of fall to the wayside, right? So for municipal governments, you're juggling multiple priorities. So sometimes scaling up those marketing efforts to address the challenges or pursue opportunities can be almost one of those nice to haves. It's daunting. It's especially when if you're a smaller municipality, you might have limited resources, budgets, constraints around that. But over the next hour and a half, 2 hours, we're going to talk about ways that you can do that in a cost-effective manner. And it might be easier than you think sometimes. So sometimes you read about case studies of larger cities, and we'll touch on a few of those during the presentation. But there are a few ways that you can do it with limited budgets and limited resources. So that being said, bringing in support of a marketing communications agency can definitely help you identify those priorities. You might have a huge laundry list of things you want to target, but you might need kind of the expertise of an agency such as Alchemy to bring that all together. So identifying those priorities, establishing the strategies and execution, building out those plans, and just making it easier to manage the next step as you kind of get into these marketing initiatives that you're looking to implement. And it's hard sometimes because it's change, right? So people sometimes, and you'll see in this slide, they get kind of thrown off by the word change. It can be seen as sometimes difficult, hard, or negative, but I like to use the term, rather than change, it's opportunity, it's growth, it's moving forward, right? So if we can do that and help you do that, it's a benefit to everyone. All right, so these next few points here are just kind of some of the areas that you might be looking to improve upon or use marketing strategies to drive forward. So first one here is delivering compelling communications to the target audiences, adopting and implementing service standards, maybe branding a municipality to attract tourism or businesses, assessing, prioritizing, and increasing of programs and services, increasing or improving compliance with a new policy that may have been introduced. If people kind of are leery or unaware of it, it's just you can use marketing and communications as a way to effectively get more people on board or even aware of the new policy. Marketing and communications is a great way to implement new programs. And it's also a good way to generate non-tax revenue through things like sponsorships and other revenue generating initiatives. So as I mentioned before, we typically see marketing as kind of that private sector, but if you replace the word profit with impact or results, many of these principles can be used in a municipal setting, right? So it's not about always about that bottom line or the profits. You can be replacing those words, as I said, with impact or results, because at the end of the day, we're serving the residents and potential visitors. So as I mentioned, those are just a few little areas that you may be using marketing and communications. Is there any questions so far at this point? Perfect. Okay, so this first section here is probably one of the most important areas that we like to start off with. So it's brand identity. Now, some of you may be further down the road in this area than others. Some may have a structured brand already. Some might have a bunch of different brands or just maybe thinking about changing into a unified brand. But these next few slides here, and there's a little case study at the end that we talk about kind of the importance of that brand and how that initial starting point really sets the framework for everything that you're really trying to achieve and accomplish. All right, so without that identity or that guide, without having that professional or trustworthy, pleasing brand, your target audience is maybe less likely to take your municipality seriously and listen to your message. So if you have something that's kind of all over the map with different logos, one department is doing one thing another way, another one is using maybe a logo from 6 years ago, where some I've seen it all, right? So it's just really about tying that all in and unifying that brand, because what that does is it builds that trust within your community. So it sees the municipality as an organization as being as an authority on the issues that matter. So if you build up that brand and there's a kind of repetitiveness with it, and they see, so when they see that logo, whether it's with public works or with recreation or any other area, if it's very similar, they'll know that it's official and it's a trustworthy brand and message that's being associated with that. So especially in the world of municipalities and really everywhere, branding is becoming more popular, leading to decisions to add or expand marketing. Again, as I mentioned, that sometimes can be seen as daunting. You could be under restrictions of budgets, resourcing. That's why some agencies, they do have money to kind of beef up internal, but what we're seeing is a lot of agents or a lot of municipalities that are smaller in size are working with agencies such as us, such as Alchemy, to help build out those strategies, as I mentioned before. So even though it can be seen as daunting, it's not difficult. We're here with you. We're here to support. So yeah, and I assume that since you're here, you're wanting to learn more, as I mentioned before. So thanks again for joining. So some cities, even as I mentioned, they hire leaders in this area. So whether they're directors of marketing, directors of strategy, it's sometimes even chief marketing officers. It's really dependent on the factors I mentioned, so including size of the municipality as well as your budget. Okay, so this next slide here is just a little bit of a brief case study of what the city of Denver did in terms of rebranding. So in the past, they kind of were in a position where they had brands and logos that were really all over the map. They didn't have a cohesive brand. They were using usually in the States they have like state seals for their branding, and some departments were doing other things, and it was just, there was no trust. As I mentioned before, all those areas were kind of being lost. So what they identified is, and this kind of goes part and parcel with beefing up their marketing efforts. So what they identified is the need to really refresh and bring all of the different departments into a cohesive manner, right? So this is actually the final logo that they came up with. So this next slide here is the end result of how they basically use that logo as it goes across all of their departments. So as I mentioned, they underwent that city brand refresh in 2013 and created a new logo that is now well used by all departments, instead of each department resorting to its own. So what that does is it helps to, once again, build that trust. So when you see maybe a social media post, or you receive something in the mail that has a logo from Denver Public Works, you know it's legit, you know it's trustworthy, you know it's official. So there's no kind of trepidation or questions around that. So as you can see, these are just a few of the logos that they use for the departments, but all of them are the same. So if you saw that, you know that it was the city of Denver. So when asked about this, so this is the CMO of the city of Denver, Jenny Schiavone. So basically when they were tasked with this, it wasn't just about kind of, okay, let's have a new logo and get it all on the same page. It's really getting those arms around what Denver's brand is, right? So it's taking that, so you can see a lot of work went into the logo design, and it's elevating that brand to create that voice, right? That cohesive unit. So there's a quote here. So we were originally tasked with getting our arms around what Denver's brand is and elevating that brand, as well as creating and managing citywide marketing and communications efforts, said Jenny Schiavone. So yeah, it's one thing to say, hey, we need a new logo, but you really have to look into what you want to communicate, what you want to say, what does your logo want people to feel, right? So sometimes you see some that are very colorful, some maybe geared more to business. Maybe if there's an area, if you want to maybe attract tech sector, you might have elements of that. So it's a really deep but fun and exciting exercise to get into when you're talking about rebranding and brand identities. As I said, I could spend the whole day talking about that, but we'll move on. So just another quote here, just to really reinforce the consistency. So as she mentions here, it's consistent right through to garbage trucks to right-of-way enforcement agent uniforms. People now have started to recognize that logo, she says. So it really helps with the marketing materials, including brochures, websites, and social media. As I said, when they see that logo, they know it's a trusted source, and it's a voice that represents the city and the people as a whole. So it's not only just about being consistent, it's about really reflecting that voice. And as we'll get further on in the presentation, it's making people excited and really feel up as they are a part of your community, right? They actually found that since the logo and the brand was so successful, other brands or other departments that aren't city associated were actually using it, right? So other areas of the city that aren't city organizations were using that brand because it was so effective and it spoke to people, right? So. Are there any questions so far before we jump into we start getting into some different strategies and approaches? Does anyone have any questions about branding or any thoughts around that? Okay. All right, so these next few slides in this section here are we're going to dive into a few different ways that you can improve and maximize your marketing approach. So in previous decades, municipal marketing has been usually used to portray a city to visitors as a desirable vacation destination, or it's really been geared to tourism. But what we're seeing now is a very concerted effort to really communicate and engage with the citizens in your local community. because as we'll see further as we get into the presentation, they really are your best resource, right? For when you're talking about spreading a positive message or even information in general. You really want to engage and use your community as what we call community champions or ambassadors. We'll get further onto the slide that there's ways to do that through different programs or different committees, but it's one way is really to not only speak to people who are visiting, but the people that reside there and live there as well. So the first way and the first new tool that we can look at is called partnership marketing. So within your municipality, you're going to have groups and organizations that definitely have similar goals, and they're more than ready and willing to collaborate with the city, with the municipality, right? So it's really important to tap into these groups and start the conversations around partnerships, build these partnerships, share these resources and team members with other community leaders to reach these wider audiences, right? Like it makes total sense to partner with like-minded organizations that will ultimately help both sides reach these audiences that are usually the same audience that you're both trying to reach, right? So within that, it shows that there's a cohesion. As I mentioned, there's a stronger voice. When someone sees that two like-minded organizations are partnering together, it builds that confidence. So as I mentioned, you're all trying to reach that same goal. So why not work together? A second area is media. Now, for most people, and I shouldn't say most, but for some, media is almost seen as a negative because sometimes they only call you or communicate if they hear something that's negative or if there's an issue or, hey, I heard that the budget is this or something that may not be seen as a positive light. And that's fine. That's part of their jobs too as reporters. And we offer media training that can address those more contentious areas. But in terms of when we're talking about marketing and communications, we can leverage the media to basically help them get our message out. Now, sometimes you are giving up some control of the message, but the cost savings associated with that, if you're to go like down the paid ad route, are they far outweigh the negative, right? So that being said, there's ways to control the message and have a very strong message that it's hard to try and twist. So an example of that would be an article about your city or your town or project that you're completing in a respected publication or newspaper has appeal and it has that audience reach. And it also helps to kind of give that credibility to the project or to the initiative, rather than just sending out a town memo or a news release. If you're utilizing the media, if you're getting them excited about it, then it's going to resonate with your audience and ultimately their audience or your audience as well. Okay, so this next section here is around influencer marketing. So this is one area that you've probably all seen if you have teenagers or anyone around that age, like TikTok or Instagram. You might have heard the term influencer, where people have like tons of followers and what they say is they just run with it and it's awesome, right? So influencer marketing is one of those areas that's definitely emerged as a major kind of lucrative division in marketing. So it's not only major companies that can profit from this, but it's also we're seeing municipalities kind of tap into that. So whether it's maybe a local resident who has a strong social media following, maybe you have kind of like maybe a community champion, or even if you have a chef or some business area where someone is really successful on social, you utilize them. So maybe strike up a partnership or talk to them, engage in terms of promoting some like-minded initiatives or projects. So whether it's through social media, it's really important. Like you might even not even know that someone might even live right in your own backyard, and utilizing that reach for kind of maybe getting to that target market that you've identified. They might have already have that straight line in, right? So it's just thinking of different creative ways to get into that audience. Are there any questions? Okay, we do have a question here. So would be partnering with an influencer be risky? Yeah, that's definitely a good question. It can be, but I think before we get into kind of partnering, there would be identifying of those audiences or even risks that would be associated with that. So I'm not saying just jump on Twitter or Instagram and find the person with the most followers and connect with them. It's like with any partnership, it's identifying risks. Like even if you're partnering with an organization, it could be seen as a risk if they have some areas that might not fit with your goals or objectives. So, but that's a great question. And there's definitely risk, but there's risk involved in anything, but it's just an opportunity that is definitely worth exploring for sure. Martha Stewart as an example. Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, yeah. So part of that, I mean, there is risk. So looking into that, kind of researching and maybe saying, hey, I don't want to touch Martha right now, but maybe say, hey, we can work with that. So it's just, again, doing that background research of what influencers you might want to engage with. But that's a great question. Thanks. Okay, so this next area in these next few slides here, we're going to be talking about a little bit more what I mentioned before about creating community champions. So really leveraging those people that are already living in your community, already working in your community, and using them to your advantage. Not only do they live and work in your community, they're almost like your first point of contact to hear about issues that maybe your office or your departments might not even hear. So they might be that they're your kind of your initial ears to the ground. They have the pulse on the community. They kind of know about the complaints or what people are feeling, and you might not even receive these, right? So it's just kind of that boots on the ground level of information that you can really tap into to learn a lot. So not only learning from them, but also giving back and making them feel part of the community and part of what you're trying to build as a community. So as we get along these slides, we're going to show a few examples of what some municipalities are doing to create these community champions and some examples of how they're successful. So as I mentioned, some of these people may be seen as like cashiers, servers around town. They're often your de facto municipal ambassadors. So they're the people that are the smiling faces. They're hearing, as I mentioned, they're hearing the complaints. They're hearing the positivity as well. It's not always negative. So they're hearing the initial messages. So use them to your advantage. And one way that you can do that, or the first way that we're going to talk about here, is developing what we call an ambassador committee or an ambassador program. So basically, much like restaurant alliances or business owners associations or any other group like that. So ambassador committees are comprised of these local celebrities, right? So as I mentioned, the type of like everyone talks to, everyone seems to know. You kind of that, oh, if this person is bringing this, or if they hear it must be legit. So it's really about bringing them all together in a way to kind of talk about what's happening in the community, right? So bringing together, if there's negativity, if there's some gripes that they're hearing around town about, example here, about parking, or if there's inconveniences, they're usually the first ones to hear. And so it's about utilizing those community ambassadors and champions. So not only to address those areas, but also promote. If you have changes in parking, if you're changing your downtown, if you have a downtown revitalization plan, if you get those people on board, it's going to go a long way to getting that message across. I mean, you're always going to have detractors and naysayers, but if you can kind of get people more engaged, it's beneficial. So when you see this, you might think, oh, another committee, another meeting, oh, this just seems daunting. But the meetings don't have to be often. Perhaps you have them once per quarter. Maybe you reward them with their time. Maybe it's lunch. Maybe it's you make a larger community event to celebrate that. If you want to go kind of broad like that's one way, but they can also be very focused. So when working on a current project where a committee is basically formed to get a better sense of what the community is saying, it kind of deviates from that like sometimes you think, oh, this is all fun. We just celebrate, we talk about the positives, but these committees and ambassador programs can also be used to get a better sense of things that are not so positive. So an example, we're currently working with a client that has a community advisory committee that was struck to basically hear the voice of the town on a very contentious project, right? So they're hearing the good, the bad, and the ugly, and they're bringing that back in a way that is making the community feel that they're being heard. So, and some great ideas are coming out of it. It's not always about what maybe the town or the municipality or the city is pushing forward and saying, we're going to do this to deal with it. It's like, what we heard from you, we're looking to improve. So as what you presented forward, we're going to be doing this strategy, or we're creating an event. What we're doing with, we're doing some tree removal. So rather than just chip it, we're going to be using it as, we're going to bring in some wood carvers, local wood carvers, and they're going to be repurposing these trees for benches, beautifying the community. So it's just little things like that we saw and identified. So that was one that we were deeply involved with here at Alchemy, that really helped to build that. So as mentioned, the committee is completely made up of volunteers as well. So it's just these people that obviously there's a reason why they want to do this. They love the community. Sometimes you may be inundated with complaints, or you sometimes wonder if they really do like where they're living. But at the end of the day, I think everyone is just really wanting to make it a better place to be. So when you've identified those champions or those people, authenticity is huge. So you don't want to come across or be seen as just using them for your own kind of purposes in terms of marketing for your municipality. So you really want to acknowledge that these people, they're already serving as spokespeople. You're just giving them a little bit more visibility. So it kind of goes to that partnership side of things as well, where it's you're engaging, you're working together, but you're not just kind of using them for your own purposes. So one way to achieve that is find ways to include them in your promotional materials that are highlighting their story and are just as beneficial for them as well. So maybe include them in marketing through, if you're doing marketing videos or social media campaigns, maybe you highlight your community champions through social. If you're refreshing your photography, maybe you highlight just faces in the community or community champions, whatever you decide to call them. Just utilize them in terms of that outreach, in terms of creative, right? So photography, branding, anything like that. And let them be authentic. Let them tell their stories about why they love the area, why they love the community, what they love about their jobs, why it's great to be here, right? So that's in a few different ways. We're talking about tourism, so why it's a great place to visit in the summer, and then even to work, that work, live, play, a term we hear here, right? So why is this a great place to raise my family? Well, if you have a community champion, a young family who's been there for 5 years, and they tell a little bit more personal story, it's a lot more impactful than just reading the words, a great place to raise a family. So if you can really highlight and bring together emotion, it goes a long way, especially in marketing and communications. So this is similar to the committees, but this is a little bit more involved. This could even look like something where it's a paid role for someone. It's again, this kind of goes to the size of the municipality. Obviously, if you're larger, you could afford to do that. So larger cities such as Calgary and Vancouver, they have their own ambassador programs. So downtown ambassadors or just community ambassadors. Obviously, that would be the best if you had all the unlimited budget and resources. I bet everyone would do that, but sometimes it's a little bit harder to do that, but it's not impossible. So ways to do that is just by kind of identifying as I mentioned before, maybe host thank you events to offer public recognition for participation. Invite these ambassadors or the committee members to different events or ribbon cutting ceremonies. Maybe you're welcoming new businesses, or if you have a capital project or campaign that's getting underway, you're utilizing these champions. A way to identify them in a manner that's maybe cost effective, you could create like buttons or signage for if you're targeting the business community, maybe something they put in the window, or a sticker that just says community champion, or I love this, insert name of town here. Just something that's, again, goes to that branding and that identifiability of someone who sees it. They know, hey, that's a community champion. They're connected. And then also what we see is that they also use the ambassador program as a way to not only hear what's happening, but to assist maybe residents or tourists or anyone that's downtown. So if you see someone downtown kind of staring at a map and wondering, like I know in here in Calgary, an example here at that picture you can see is they're all over. They're downtown. They notify these people, they see, they help. So it's just, that goes a long way to building that. It's part of the brand. Like everything is done strategically. So it's that welcoming face. It's that person who's there to help. So it's really about creating those programs. Whether you can go huge, like larger cities, or smaller. Maybe it's just, like I said, a sticker in a window, knowing that that's a place to go if you need support or have a question. Okay, so this next, I'm going to play a short video here. It's just an example of what Vancouver is doing with their ambassador program. So this is obviously a marketing video. It's produced. It utilizes the program. In this video, they are paid positions, but as you'll hear, you'll start to pick out the message of what they're trying to convey. It's not about just, okay, here's our people that are wandering downtown in the blue coats. If you see them, go talk to them. It's what they're bringing and what the role brings to that person who is in it. So we'll just play it here.
My name is Rachel Delina, and I'm a downtown ambassador. A day in the life of an ambassador looks like coming together at the beginning of our shift, going over our events, what's happening, making sure we're all up to speed on any changes that have been happening in the downtown area. And then we hit the streets and we cover 90 blocks and we make sure that everything's going well. We'll check parkades, make sure everything's okay. We'll go in and say hi to businesses, see how they're doing. We will help anyone who needs help, ask any questions, make sure everyone's happy, and then that's it. It's really that simple, but every day is completely different. There's something very special about this program because there's a group of us and we're all different. We all have different backgrounds, we all have different experiences and different personalities, and we all are extremely passionate in our job, in going out and helping people, going out and just smiling, and that difference can change a person's day. If we see someone in any kind of distress, whether they're lost, obviously holding up a big map and not knowing where to go, or whether it's subtle, like they just look really concerned on their face, we will all step up. No one needs to ask us. No one needs to say, oh, that person over there is lost, you should go help. We all are jumping at the chance to help that person and make that person feel better, or make that difference, or help them connect with their lost family member, help them find their hotel, help them find a really good place to eat because it's been over 12 hours. You can't work this job and not have that passion. It's not possible. The Downtown Ambassadors are here to help. We're here to make a difference. My name's Rick.
Okay, did that come across okay? Could everyone hear it and hopefully see it? It wasn't too choppy. Perfect. I don't know about you, but I want to go to Vancouver right now. Yeah, so that's just an example, right? Of obviously that was very well produced, and it's a marketing video, so it's going to be kind of the best foot forward. But I do trust that that is happening every day in downtown Vancouver when you see those ambassadors. So it's just little ways of kind of utilizing the people that are currently there, and just again, as I said, this is probably a paid role, but it's just, if you're looking at maybe developing a program, I don't think any idea is out of the realm of possibility. So really it's just, you can look through that and what really identify your needs of that and just target. Do we need something like that? Well, maybe not now, but maybe we do. So that's another area that we here at Alchemy can definitely support with. As mentioned, we created that community advisory committee for one of our current clients, a small municipality. So it's just an area too that's, I'm really starting to see it really pick up. So again, it all ties back to that, telling the stories, using emotion, using real people to get that across as well. Okay, so this next area that we're going to talk about is more around change. And usually with change, it's sometimes there's difficult situations that need to be communicated that you're just dreading, or you know that you're going to get pushback from your constituents and your residents, right? It's just one of those days. It's like, oh, do we really have to do this? So unfortunately, yes, it's always, there's always going to be times where you do have to get those difficult, hard messages across. But these next few slides and these next few tools that we're going to talk about are really show ways to kind of take that edge off. And again, it kind of goes back into that understanding of the audience and understanding of your residents and who you're trying to reach. So as I mentioned, change is hard, and for smaller municipalities, navigating those significant changes through major projects such as construction, or just maybe shutting down a road, right? Maybe a road that someone has driven for 40 plus years. It's the way they've always gone. Like, it's gonna be, it might be the best way. It might make everything quicker, shorter, more effective, but to that resident or to that person, it's the wrong thing to do. So how do we tackle that? How do we look at those audiences that may have different needs? There could be everything from financial needs, just to maybe if there's where we say something, oh, it only costs this much for this person. Well, maybe there's a group that amount is huge. So it's just really about identifying the different audiences that we're trying to communicate on the onset of trying to communicate those changes or those new projects. So whenever we're introducing a new project or policy that's likely to impact the day-to-day life in a community, we need to be thinking about that change management, communications, and marketing strategy. So this is a little bit different. It's to me, it's fun. That might be sort of weird, but it's not as fun as the creating branding and ambassadors and smiley, happy people and all that. Sometimes it can be difficult, but it's, like I said, it's an opportunity rather than change. It's usually a way to move forward. So when you're building out those change management, communications, and marketing strategies, you really want to understand the process and the tools that you want to use to help those residents understand and ultimately contribute and adapt to that change. So if you've identified that maybe the target audience isn't really big on social media, or they're of an older population, maybe it's a community event that you host, maybe it's a door knock, maybe you physically visit every place. It's really understanding the needs of your audience. Whereas maybe it is a social, or everyone is talking about it on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. So maybe that's an area that you target. So planning is huge. It's one area that I always want to start with, because sometimes I see with other areas or departments or even other agencies, they present this cookie cutter thing that you say, okay, here you go, follow this. It's social media, it's this, that, and this. Well, you might not need social, and you might be putting resources into that are just taking it away. And then you might even get criticism saying, well, why did you focus all your energy on online when half this area doesn't even know how to use a computer, right? So it's just really understanding the audience and the process from the onset. So For any major change to be successful, again, you have to have that effective communication strategy from the onset. So what I see usually with most failure in change management, it can be traced all the way back to that lack of communication or that lack of planning right from the beginning. So did you identify this? Well, no, we didn't. So it's just one of those, you can trace it all the way back. So planning is huge when you're looking at effectively communicating change. So at the start, some of you may have seen this, the 4 principles of change management, but we can use this in terms of a marketing component as well. So again, as I mentioned, it's really about understanding that change, understanding what you're proposing, what you need to communicate, whether it's as large as a major, like as I said, maybe a major road shift, you're changing a route, or a small area where we're maybe taking down a certain section of a park or moving something, right? Or it could even be different positives as well. It doesn't always have to be a removal of something. It could be an addition of something as well. But again, understanding that change, there's that word again, plan. So planning the change, planning how we communicate, planning what audiences we're gonna reach, implementing that change. So what does that look like? So rather than, obviously there's a component of when you're actually doing the work or starting to implement, but even before that, what does that look like? So implementing a marketing and communications campaign that's targeted to how it affects the residents of this community. Again, you can tie it all the way back to those community champions. Maybe there's a resident that lives in that affected area that you can use and utilize to help spread the message, right? So again, it's just finding those ways to implement and ultimately the last point, communicating that change. So as I mentioned, maybe a social strategy isn't the best approach, or maybe it is. So it's just finding those vehicles to communicate it. Maybe it's a large community event celebrating the groundbreaking, or maybe it's different things that are engaging that you can use to effectively get those messages across. Or ultimately, if it is something that, you know what, it's going to be hard, then maybe you listen to that, and maybe it's a more formal town hall meeting where you really address the concerns and thoughts of your community. Because at the end of the day, sometimes there's changes that affect the livelihoods of people. Maybe they've built a house they've been in for 50 years, and now you're saying, oh, we can't, you gotta move. Or so it's just really about identifying that, right? Okay, so this next slide here, it really dives into as I mentioned, understanding the needs and the personas of your residents. So in marketing and communications, we often, in kind of our world, that's where usually we start. So we come up with the audience persona or the ideal person, right? So it could be Joe Green, who is the 35-year-old construction worker who lives in this area. Or so it's just really about identifying those areas and those personas of your audiences and the needs of your residents. So before you communicate anything, whether it's change or a new program, you need to understand the needs of your people. So needs of the residents. So understand their concerns, understand their motivations, understand, as I mentioned before, that they've been using that thoroughfare, that road for 40 plus years. So yeah, they might be, maybe it's just a lack of understanding. So it's just maybe building that as your message. So ways to kind of understand this and just to understand those audiences a little bit better is you might even already have, I know some municipalities have this research already completed, but if you don't, there's ways you can build it through focus groups, through surveys, through feedback forums. I know some municipalities and towns insert things into like their water bills or just little leaflets and campaign material that way. So whether it's a survey, you can utilize maybe some of your functions that are already connecting with the community. So it's a good way to kind of look internally as well to see if you're already using those things. So it's just a good way to determine kind of get a good baseline or base level of the attitudes that you're likely to encounter. And sometimes you might already know, like even depending on how long you've been there, you just know that, okay, we know that this person is gonna complain, or we know that they won't be on board, or we know that they will be on board. So it's just really understanding the audience. So again, this definitely helps you decide, as I mentioned, what strategies you'll need to best deliver that message. So it's one of those areas you don't have to use them all. You don't have to be on social just to be on social. I mean, it's effective, but as I mentioned, sometimes it's not the best way. So again, it's just really planning and deciding what strategies you'll need to be using. And that's when we work with clients, that's the first place we start is, okay, well, sometimes I hear, well, we need to get this out on social. Well, then I come back, do you really need, like, there's a little bit of pushback. There is definitely tough conversation. So it's a good way to really identify what you need to be focusing and targeting. So one area too, when I always think about change management, it's really starting from that base level, that informed place. So again, it goes all the way back to building up that positive brand and building that trust. So you're starting at a place where you have that clear plan or that clear information that you're trying to push out. So the more you can start there, the more trust you've built, the more kind of concrete questions you have and answers, it helps to effectively push that communication. So if you kind of go into it where you're just announcing and you don't have a clear idea of the thoughts or the concerns of your residents, you will probably be caught unaware by some attitudes that you never thought were there. Like you'd be like, oh, wow, is that really a concern? Well, yeah, they're saying it, but if you were ahead of the game and if you did that research, if you worked with us, or if we needed to implement a survey strategy, then you would have those attitudes and concerns already. An example of that is one client that we worked with in the past. They were looking at doing a municipal wastewater treatment facility. Now, some people are on board, some people didn't really understand. Again, it kind of goes back to that demographic where, okay, it's not a huge issue for me, or maybe you have to maybe a tax increase, or there's some area you have to pay. It might work for them, but if you're looking at the other side, maybe there's a aging or a percentage of the population that's aging where that might not work for them. Maybe that affects their income, their livelihoods huge. So it's just really understanding those different audiences. So sometimes not everyone has the same needs or the same resources, the same financial means. Like what might seem like a small change for one might be huge for another. So really it's about just identifying and understanding the needs of your residents. Okay, so clarifying your message to create engaging content. The first things first here, if you don't understand what's going on, no one else is going to know. So you really have to understand, and this goes back all the way back to that planning, and you can kind of see how all these things are tying in together and interweaving. But if you don't understand the importance of what you're doing or the message that you want to convey with your projects, whether that be positive change or change in general, no one else is going to get it. So that's why it's necessary to really establish those clear, concise key messages from the onset. So we do offer in a few other sessions, just really, this kind of goes into media training as well and crisis comms, but really building out those messaging and what those messages are. So usually we say to stick with 3. So it's a good way to just have 3 key messages for a few reasons. It's easier to understand. If you have like 25 key messages, then things are going to get lost in the shuffle. So it's always good to keep it concise, whether that be 3, 4, don't go any really higher than 5, but 3 is that kind of that good area to stick with. So have those established messages that are clear and concise. So that'll help to kind of clarify and make that change or make that message that you're trying to convey a lot easier to understand. But sometimes you could have the best key message in the world. You might sit down and write it and be like, wow, how could anyone not understand what we're trying to say? How could anyone be mad at this? Clear messaging isn't enough. You also need to create and understand that there has to be next steps to it. So it could be a message that you maybe post on your website or a social media post, but rather than just having that standalone message, why not create some different engaging content or varied areas where you can drive people? So maybe an FAQ section on the website, maybe a dedicated project page, maybe maybe you engage someone to have a weekly update on the project. Again, tying back to that community champion. If it's someone who has that area of expertise, maybe they do a blog, maybe they do a series of videos, right? That are always repeating those 3 key messages, but it's just another way for someone to engage and see that rather than just reading it. Oh, same thing again, another tweet, exact same thing. So it's just utilizing different tools to help get that message across multiple channels for the maximum reach, right? So your content should never be like, this is a good way to say it. So just because, so say you release a document that think, okay, it's 15 pages, everything's in there. It may be a hindrance, right? So you don't need to always be, it's almost like sometimes around that less is more idea. So there could be comprehensive information, but if you have those messages dialed in and those secondary, those tertiary tools to get them to those different spots, that goes a heck of a long way further than maybe a 15-page document that here's the document you can read that outlines everything. Well, if you use these different tools, they're not only engaged, but they're learning the information, but it's almost like through osmosis, you don't realize that you're getting informed. But if you're tasked with someone to say, well, we have all the information in this document, read it. Like I wouldn't want to do that. Like, so it's just thinking of different ways to help get that messaging across. So if you aren't informative or transparent from the outset, you're likely to find yourself in that position of having to kind of rebuild that. So be honest, like saying, this is how we're doing things. These are our tightened up key messages. Again, it goes all the way back to that trust, right? So if you've built that trust, whether it be through rebranding or if you already have that trust within your community, it can be broken real fast if you're not transparent from the outset when you're trying to convey these difficult or even positive messages. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Okay, so this next slide here talks a little bit about kind of those different ways to kind of get that message across, or different resources and access to providing the information that'll help people either be on board with the decision or just understand it a little bit more. So for the change to be successful, residents need to be able to adapt, which often requires additional resources. So you'll need to be mindful that when you're presenting this, as I mentioned before, it could be a huge change for these individuals. So be mindful of that, and be mindful that it's going to impact people differently. It's not all going to be the same. It's not all going to be, and even with those key messages, it's not all going to answer all the questions. So it's being adaptable and finding the way to provide different resources and access to people. Again, it's identifying those personas, right? There's not a one size fits all communication strategy that's going to be efficient. It's not, it just doesn't work that way, right? And if it did, it'd be really easy to do, because we wouldn't be having sessions like this or talking about this. It'd be one plan that everyone uses. So the resources that you should be providing, as I talk about this, they're going to look different depending on the size, the scope, the outcome of the project that you're trying to communicate. So again, it all goes back to those needs of the community. So obviously, when the project was announced, there was an identifiable need for one area, but again, it's just identifying that need for another that might be affected by the change. So that's one area that's extremely important, is just acknowledge that there's different areas, and maybe as you identified in research, you might want to scale up communications for this one area. So I know with some clients that we're currently working with, that's exactly what we needed to do, is just identify that, okay, so it's affecting the whole town, but these one area or this one neighborhood is extremely affected. So how do we scale up our communications to really reach those people? So it's not about just doing everything more and better. It's just sometimes there's areas that you really need to focus on. So it's just one thing not to say, okay, we're just going to by volume, push the entire message out more. It's really targeting those communities that you need to work with and help them adapt and thrive and understand. So another area, when you're looking at your strategy around communications and planning, and when you're communicating change, or when you're communicating anything in general, in reality here, it's plan for that ongoing communication. So even though the project might be finished, or even though the campaign is over, or even though the event has passed, there's still work that you can be doing after the fact around the follow-up messaging. We want to continue to hear from you. So what that does is it continues to build that trust, or if trust was broken or kind of knocked down a few levels as a result of the initiative or the change or the project you're trying to communicate, it helps to rebuild that. So basically, there's always a follow-up. It's almost like a campaign after the campaign. So it's like a rolling campaign of messaging that helps to reinforce the change, but in a way that's ongoing, right? So what that does is it really helps prevent, with everything, it really helps prevent the rumors from circulating, or it's like, oh, they only did it for this. No, we're not going to hear from them, or whatever. And I think part of that, even going way back to when we looked at the beginning here about planning effective communication, is you really want to stop those rumors from circulating from the onset. So if you can have those 3 messages nailed down, if you can have that strategy tightened up, you're going to identify that there's probably going to be rumors or false information. So how do we handle that? And we can definitely work together to support with you on that. We've done that with numerous. I think that's one of the first things and major areas that we always hear about from our clients, is that there's concern about misinformation. Well, how do we stop that? And especially with the age of social media, where anyone can go on a computer and say, hey, I was talking to so-and-so and the town's going to be doing this, and it can be completely wrong. Then you're like, oh my, we have a huge issue. But if you can plan for that, and this kind of goes into a little bit of the crisis communications planning that we're going to be talking about a little bit further in this session. And we also have a additional workshop that's coming up around that. But what it does is it really helps to, again, it's just planning, right? It helps to identify the things that, heaven forbid, happen, but they could happen, right? So again, it goes a little bit more into that crisis language, but kind of, it's always good to plan and be aware of something that you can kind of cut off before it gets started. So kind of, again, to kind of wrap up this section of the slides, like regardless of what you're pursuing or what you're trying to, the message you're getting across, if you're communicating it effectively, and that's at the core, kind of that, if it all fits in with like your core values of your municipality, then it's easier. It makes it a lot less daunting for you as working in the municipalities and trying to effectively get this change out there. It can be hard, but if you can do that in a way that you feel comfortable, and again, going back to that, if you don't understand, then how can you expect people to understand? So it's really immersing yourself in that and building it, again, at the core of what you do, right? So yes, it's hard, but good communication, good planning, good partners, good agencies such as Alchemy, little plug there, but it makes the difference. It really does. It makes all the difference. So any questions around that one? Wow, you guys are easy today. Oh, good. And there'll be time for at the end of the presentation for questions you may have. Okay, so this next few slides here, we're going to be talking about crisis communications. And as I mentioned, we do offer a larger workshop and seminar around this that gets into everything from building a crisis communications plan to training your media spokespeople, to identifying a crisis, to identifying issues, to creating kind of practices that will sort of see. I mean, you can never predict a crisis or anything like that, but it'll, again, as I mentioned, you'll be better informed and prepared. So Just a little shorter version of this. So whether it be maybe it's a natural disaster such as flooding, or if there's maybe a scandal or a political issue, or maybe if it's just again, we kind of use the development a lot as the project of or as an example of projects. So maybe it's a contentious development. Maybe I know with some previous clients, tree removal is also always a huge thing, right? So maybe it's areas like that. So every municipality, and this kind of goes all the way back to that planning too, when it comes to getting that message in terms of a communication strategy, but with crisis comms, it's the same thing. So every municipality needs to be prepared to conduct that urgent and effective communications when things like these happen. So you might be, and they seem to always happen on a Friday. Sometimes in my previous experience, it's like the most inopportune times, or on the weekend, you get a call and you say, hey, this is happening. So what does that look like? So it goes all the way back to that effective communications planning. Okay, so we hear this, what do we do? What are the next steps? Who needs to know? As I said, this is a huge, we can spend the whole day on this, but it's just, again, it goes to identifying those audiences. So for the purpose of today, we'll talk more about the community and the communications and marketing that you can utilize to reach your community members in the event of a crisis. So the biggest thing that we're starting to see is this is where social media can be one of your strongest tools, right? So we're in a world, it's increasingly interconnected. It's usually you're going to find about something on social, on Twitter, on Facebook before anyone else. It used to be before, it used to be media. They used to be the first ones to know, and they sometimes would call it. Usually it's social media now. So the biggest thing with that is part of the crisis communications planning is just have that solid social media strategy built out, right? So it's one thing to just push the message out, but you have to be monitoring. You have to be seeing what people are saying. So that's a way that you're going to be protecting people from that misinformation or from that information that is of a crisis situation. So if you see it and you're late to react and you haven't said anything for 8 hours, then that's taking down that trust that we've worked so hard to build with the ambassador programs and everything else I talked about in the earlier slides, that these situations can destroy that in the blink of an eye. So it's really about building out those tools and using those strategies when we're talking about positives, and also using them in a way that might not be, so we're using them in situations that might not be favorable. So it's really about keeping the communities informed, and social is a great way to do that. So even if you have identified, obviously it changes with the scenario and the situation, but if you've identified some draft key messages that maybe identify a flood or identify a certain area, you can obviously start there and work as necessary, but it's a good way to really have that strategy hammered out, nailed down at the onset. So it's funny when we're talking about crisis communications, you're always going to have almost two sides of the issue. There's going to be your detractors and like people who are supporting you, right? So it's really, I guess you can just see as just in the world right now, there is a distinct polarization of society happening right now. So it's really important to be clear in our messaging and how we communicate to not only the people who are not supporting you, but to your supporters, right? Or to people that are understanding of what's happening. So it's really one thing to keep in mind. It's really how you got to think how we think, act, and relate to each other. So if you're sending out a message, maybe in a time where it could be emotional, you want to realize that and don't send out maybe something that could be misconstrued as just being super corporate or super kind of on that level, because it can, again, damage that reputation. Where if you are in tune with that and you understand the audience, you understand those personas that you've developed or those people that are in your community, if you can come out with something has some care and concern messaging around it, it's going to go a long way in getting support or just bringing the community together if it was a very tragic situation, right? So when we do our media training and our crisis communications seminars, and we use examples of kind of what not to do and what not to say. And there's an example that we use from the BP oil spill. I think it was if it wasn't the CEO, it was one of the very upper people, right? So basically I could kind of see what he was trying to say, but he said he wanted his life back. So yeah, it was just confirmed it was the CEO. So an interview was basically BP oil spill disaster. The CEO said, I basically want my life back. So that doesn't come across with any care and concern. Like, he was nailed on that. So it's just really about being aware of those messages that you're trying to communicate in terms of a crisis, right? So. Okay, so this next, we're going to continue to talk a little bit about social media here. And then the purpose of this is just when we're using this as a way to effectively communicate, at the end of the day, when we're using these tools, it's ultimately to protect the people and property that are in this emergency situation. So this deviates a little bit from when you're creating messaging around an event or a positive thing. It's if an emergency or crisis hits, providing that information, as I said before, in a timely manner, can go a long way. Even if it's just like, even if it's, you're really not saying anything, or if you're saying, we are aware of the situation, we're working on it, or if you're ahead of the game and you have some resources, maybe you have an emergency plan that goes into effect. So maybe there's a website that goes up, you can drive them to that. But the worst thing you can do, and I've heard it a lot, it's like, well, we don't know anything, so let's just not respond. Let's wait. Even if it's something, even if you just acknowledge that you may have read the tweet or you saw the message or you were aware, it just goes a long way into keep continuing to keep that trust alive and to build that trust. So as I mentioned, recently, social media has become that place for people to access that important information. On the same hand, it's also the place where misinformation spreads. So that being said, it's just, as I mentioned before, it's paramount to be monitoring this stuff and to be aware, not only for when you're pushing out a message, but if you're trying to hear kind of what's happening. I know some communities have their separate kind of like neighborhood group pages or anything like that. So if you can get into those groups that aren't managed by your municipality or your department, it's a great way to kind of hear what's going on as well. Because in regards to this, to crisis, that might be the first place you see it, or even in regards to misinformation, that might be the first place you see it too. So it's just a way of finding that, acknowledging it, and then going all the way back to the planning again. As you can see, I'm a huge planner in that regard, but knowing how to respond to it, and you're not being caught off guard. Like, I mean, there's always going to be things that come up that you didn't see coming, but you can be prepared, right? There's always ways that you might be prepared a little bit better if you didn't do any planning or monitoring or anything like that. So if you have a communication strategy, it's always important to understand and build in that social media, and then just even the strategy in general. It's how to effectively respond in timely fashions when we identify that social media is probably the most volatile, high pressure, rapidly evolving and changing space that we have to deal with. So usually that's elevated in terms of crisis, or when there's demonstrations or protests. That's usually the place where you're going to find it be the most heated, because that's the beauty of social media. You can share opinions, whether that's, if you might disagree or not, but they're there. And I think you need to acknowledge, and it's how you respond and how you react to that. That can go a long way in terms of not only if you have to respond directly to a message, it's also a good way to kind of get a pulse on the changing thoughts or the personas in your community, right? So knowing that maybe this thought or this thinking is there, it goes a long way. And maybe there's a project that comes down a couple months after a demonstration or a protest, or a year, and you can say, hey, yeah, like, we can probably prepare for that again, because it's the same sort of stuff. So it's, again, just goes back to that planning and understanding your audience and the message that you're trying to get out there. So I'm going to say a word and you might think, what, why are we talking about that? So muster point. So usually when you hear the term muster point, it's like in a construction area or a place to go when there's a fire drill, you all go to that area. But you can establish muster points in communications and marketing planning. So in terms of crisis comms, you establish what we call muster points. What are those places that you want people to go kind of during the emergency, but also before? So you establish that those hashtags or those channels that you kind of ingrain or drive into people that they know to go there if there's an emergency or if there's a crisis or if there's even a contentious topic. This can go all the way back to the marketing and communication strategies for messaging too, is if you build those out ahead of time, you're getting people to go to those trusted, controlled spots that you are aware of, right? So rather than, and I mean, there are always going to be the misinformation. There's always going to be pages that post stuff, but if you can sort of get a handle on how to control and lead people to the correct information, then you're ahead of the game, right? So these things can act as your central spot for information. So whether it's, as I mentioned before, maybe there's a website, emergency website that gets activated when you're in that situation. Well, it's one thing to have that, but if you never talk about it, and this kind of goes into the communications strategy and planning, talk about it. So like maybe you can do some videos around it. You can sit down and do a interview with the head of your crisis comms team, like people like that. So again, it's bringing that emotion, bringing that real people into it. And then in the event of an emergency where you have to utilize these tools, maybe you're ready to launch it and someone's sitting down, it says, oh yeah, that's the thing that so-and-so was talking about, or that video I watched. Then it's easier for them to understand that way, right? So it's really about creating that central spot of information to flow in the event of the crisis. So as I mentioned, you're controlling it. It's easier to monitor. Like I said, there's always going to be other stuff, but if you are in control of that, it goes a long way in terms of crisis communications. All right, does anyone have any questions? Okay. So as I mentioned before, kind of what we do. So at Alchemy, we work with municipalities to develop these communication strategies that serve pretty much all of those functions that I talked about and discussed in the presentation. So whether it's managing difficult conversations around when it's crisis communications, or even difficult conversations that might not be direct to a crisis, but it could be more of an issue. We definitely support in kind of issues management and issues training. And we have some awesome, great templates that we've developed that are issues tracking metrics and sheets where you can identify when an issue elevates from an issue into a crisis and what levels are associated with that. So we use a lot of color codes and numbers. So 1 to 5, kind of green to red. I kind of did that quickly, but you get the idea, just charts like that. And ways to really identify if it is a crisis at all. Like I've worked with some clients and in some areas and with some groups that everything was a crisis, right? Like, so we're going it could be this at level 5. Well, no, sometimes it's not. And again, it's just building out that effective plan to communicate that to leadership or to mayor or to council, that's what they might see as in their eyes might be a huge crisis, might be more of a smaller issue that's easier to mitigate if we just implement these certain channels. So that's one thing that we do around crisis comms. So we really, in our way that we kind of do crisis communications, is that people are at the heart of this, right? Usually it's affected when there's a situation, it's going to affect a person, a group of people, a community, a country, whatever it is. Like there's always at the heart of it, there's always that emotion. So we tend to use that in our messaging and even in the pre-planning. So you'll see a lot of when we're identifying personas, identifying audiences, what do they need to know? How do they need to know it? it's a lot more than just, here's your crisis plan, get this person to call that. Like, it's really engaged. So I encourage you to check out our website, and we do have I have a slide here at the end that has some upcoming events and workshops that we're going to be doing that really key in on a lot of these areas. And some of them are building out on some points that I presented today in today's workshop. Just again, we'll just go through them a little bit more in detail and in depth. But yeah, does anyone have any questions before I wrap up this portion? Okay, so this next slide here is just something we're going to introduce, and you're kind of the first people to see this, so it's like almost a premiere thing. So Alchemy, we're in the process of putting together what we're calling a Municipal Crisis Communications and Public Engagement Working Group. So what we're looking to do is basically engage you folks for like 2 people per municipality to join a 3-month working group, which we will facilitate. And what the idea here is to share the best practices in public engagement, crisis comms, kind of what we talked about. Maybe there's some things that you guys are doing that are kind of right along the lines of what I talked about, or maybe there's some stuff that I didn't mention that you found is effective. It's just a way to bring everyone together in a way to share these ideas. So there's a few little points here about just commitment. So we're looking right now to start at around 4 hours a month of time commitment between these facilitated sessions that will be facilitated by Alchemy. And then there'd be a little bit of homework, but don't get turned off by that term. It's just a little more of just like information sharing type things. So right now we're targeting April to June to kick this off. That might change just based on interest, but hopefully we'll do it sooner if we hear a huge interest. But April to June is the target. There is a commitment about you can't miss more than 1 session. If not, then it might not be the group for you, but that's okay. And then examples, we're going to be looking at sharing current or past project examples with the group. And now I understand that there could be issues with privacy and stuff like that, but even if we just use broad strokes, kind of what I used in the presentation, that's fine too. You can just, or totally change names, whatever, that's fine. And then there's a contact information to register, or if you just want a little more information on what that entails, you can email one of our colleagues here, Kristen at alchemycommunications.ca. So she is basically our project management and municipality strategist and expert in the area. We all work together, but she is the one who's going to be leading this project. So I strongly encourage you to reach out to her, or you can reach out to me directly as well. So my contact information is on the last slide of this presentation. So yeah, you can send me questions around that as well. Does anyone have any initial questions around that, or initial thoughts, not only about the presentation that I just had, but maybe around this Municipal Crisis Communications Working Group? Because as I said, this is sort of you're the first group that I'm kind of rolling this, or that we are kind of rolling this out to. So that's okay if there's no initial thoughts, but if anyone has any initial thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
I can pop in too, just to back you up on that, Drew. Yeah, we're just finding that a lot of our clients may not have the budget for a full like communications assessment or full support, but want to work through some upcoming issues and get a plan in place. And so this would be the opportunity to do that. I'll be leading this group, so you're welcome to join. It's free of charge, and just will help you target some of those issues and pre-planning if you'd like to do that within a group setting.
Perfect. Thanks, Catherine. Okay. So that wraps up the formal presentation around why we need effective marketing and communication strategies, but I will be jumping into the next slides here about upcoming workshops and events. We have a question here on the chat. Is the working group free? Yes, it is free. Catherine, you can confirm that, but
Yeah, totally free. So it's really just an opportunity for our connections and our partners to get together and work through some issues, or just to learn from others in terms of their past experiences and case studies. We'll be going through a lot of different crisis communications or issues management, and how to plan for them, and how to just have a we like to have our clients, they call them all kinds of different things depending on the client, but kind of a crisis comms binder of templated strategies, checklists. When these things happen, people tend to get quite upset. And so it's hard to think straight. And so, some of you I know have been through some of these situations with us. And so you can attest to how stressful they can be. It's hard to remember what order you should call your stakeholders in, or that you have, if you don't have templated holding statements, or what a press release could look like. Sometimes it's hard to create those in the moment, especially if you only have 60 minutes or less to respond. Sometimes you have journalists calling immediately, as Drew and I experience on a regular basis. So you need to have some of those things in place. And if you're not used to doing that, this might be a good opportunity for you to learn more about it. So you don't need to have any background experience. Don't feel like you need to. If you're just looking to learn more, you're welcome to come to.
great. Good question. Okay, so get your pen and paper out, handy, jot these down if you're interested. So these are some upcoming events and workshops that we're going to be doing in the coming months. So the next one that we have is going to be the media training workshop that I had mentioned. So this is, obviously you can see by the time, this is a longer time commitment, and there is a cost associated with this one, but I can maybe get Catherine to kind of elaborate a little bit more about what this one looks like, and then I can jump into the next ones here.
Yeah, so if your spokespeople on your team don't have media training, I would encourage you to get that sorted out right away. So this is a full day training. A lot of you have done that with us, but sometimes your teams change. So if you would like to do that in a group setting, so obviously it won't be specific to your organization, it will be more general case studies that we'll be going through and practicing against. But if you're interested in that, just let us know. And any of us can direct you to registration on that, but it is on our website. It's 9 to 3. For attendees, it's $5.99. If you're a client of ours, even a past client, it's free of charge. We like to have our clients media trained on a regular basis. So, and if you're a nonprofit or, a very small municipality, let us know too, and we can work something out to meet the needs of your budget. So you're welcome to attend. So the morning sessions, just listening, and the afternoon is more interactive. And if anybody has been through our media training, we test you on what it's like to speak to a journalist and have a journalist ask you questions. It's one of the most fun parts of my day. So if you're interested, just let me know. Feel free to email us, and any of us could get you to me to answer questions if you don't have my email. But my email is catherine@alchemycommunications.ca.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. So the next one that I'm going to be leading is in April, and it's building trust in municipalities. So this one is basically, we're going to be building, funny term, but building upon sort of what I talked about in the first few minutes or first few slides of this presentation. So it's how we effectively use communications to build that trust. So what that looks like in terms of messaging. And this one will be a little bit more interactive and have some examples of previous messages, and also call on a little bit more participation in that regard in terms of building trust in municipalities. So if you're interested in that one, it's in April, end of April, but you can email me ahead of time. And also for everyone attending today, we're going to be sending out a list of these upcoming workshops that'll also have links to register and just a little bit more information. So look for that probably within the next day or two, along with just some, the recording and where to find the recording from today's session. Okay, so the next one here in May, we're going to be doing, again, as I mentioned, the crisis communications planning. So this one, I might adjust the time a bit, but it might be a little more than an hour, and we're going to be really diving into the crisis comms planning that we talked about during this session. But again, it'll be a little bit more involved and really focusing on those crisis communication scenarios, everything from media training to the messaging to kind of what to look for. And as I talked about before, identifying what might be an issue versus a crisis, stuff like that. Okay, and then in June, we're going to be doing a workshop on cancel culture. And I believe Catherine will be leading that one. So if she wants to maybe give a quick little synopsis of that one, that'd be great.
Yeah, so this is for a lot of our municipalities are facing and partners are facing all kinds of cancel culture. So this is where you're called out for inappropriate behavior on social media, where there's no due process or any kind of conversation around this. This is quite a hot button topic. There's lots of information about this on our website as well, if you're interested. So anything to do with cultural shifts or anti-oppression, where oppression shows up, in workplaces, all of that kind of high risk content is going to social media, as you all know, and causing quite a bit of reputational damage. So if you're interested in that conversation, please join us in June.
Can't wait for June. No more
We're
snow.
staring at all this snow. Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, that wraps it up. I'm going to do one final call for questions. If anyone has any just comments, feedback, questions, that'd be great. But if not, I really hope that you learned something from my presentation today, or even if it just maybe created a question or jogged a memory or just put something in. I hope that what I shared today was beneficial, and I really enjoyed it and it was fun. But like I said, if you have any questions that you don't want to share today, you can email me directly at my email address there, drew@alchemycommunications.ca, or you can also give me a call at 403-472-6784, or you can text too. I know people text, whatever you want. I'm open for the communication. So thank you very much. Have a great day. If you're in Calgary, try to stay warm. I think it's sort of warming up, but if not, bundle up. So thank you very much and have an awesome day.